joint presentation with Juan García from the Spanish National Research Council. And I guess he's also here today somewhere in this virtual room. Today, our talk will focus on Northern Gujarat, and it will draw on data arising from both our PhDs within the North Gujarat Archaeological Project, which was directed by Professors Madela and Ajit Prasad, as well as from our more recent works, in my case, in collaboration with Dr. Cameron Petrie and the Turin's team, including Drs. Hector Orengo and Arnau Garcia Mulsosa, who is also talking later. So part of what we will show today results from our participation in previous events related to the archaeology of sustainability, as well as the raising topic of heritage at risk or endangered archaeology. And I guess that these are concepts or new trends that almost all of us deal with on a daily basis. So while using the Northern Gujarat Plains as a case study, we will highlight the long-term land use practice that shaped the present-day landscape. And we will also underline the main pressing land transformations that put at risk many Hindus and other heritage sites, while also drawing some directions and next steps in our agenda. We all have seen how in recent years there's been much interest in taking approach from environmental or landscape archaeology beyond the strict archaeological scope, as we all agree that archaeology can provide long-term perspective or what I call stories of past land use. And we can certainly contribute to present-day debates concerning, for example, future agricultural strategies and food security, as well as heritage management policies. So this is the core idea under the broad scope of the archaeology of sustainability, which is certainly not new at all, as it has close ties to the early development of archaeological perspective into human ecology, for example, and the studies based on traditional ecological knowledge. Moreover, for Gujarat and Rajasthan, for example, we have early works such as the Ecology and Archaeology book by Agrawal and Pandey in the late 70s, and I was even born by that time, which already introduced many long-term interactions between geomorphology, climate, and land use. So what's new in this scenario? At least a decade ago, if not earlier, as illustrated by the examples on the left of the slide, archaeology as a discipline became more aware of the value of its insights into past land use, while also working across disciplines and sectors. We might not save the planet, as we have many other concerns right now, but there is a global effort to promote new interdisciplinary frameworks for sustainable developments, such as the Tigris project, and especially the work led by Dr. Adam Green in Cambridge in enhancing India's agricultural resilience through archaeological and historical data, among many other initiatives. On another note, many land use legacies, if you want to say, they are also intrinsically related to an intensification of human activities that trigger many actions affecting the preservation and visibility of archaeological sites, while also increasing the rate at which natural processes such as erosion or desertification shape the landscape. So in that regard, the evaluation of natural and anthropic threats to endangered archaeology is yet another global concern that must be fully integrated in Indo's research agendas. The list of potential risk is well known to all of us, and we have many similar critical situations in other drylands. And for example, particularly relevant to Indo's context is the large-scale development of irrigation infrastructure, which leads to the expansion of mechanized agriculture and the consequent destruction of many potential archaeological locations. While such activities have been happening for decades and even centuries, we might face now a new increase of other activities such as illicit mining and systematic illegal excavations, such as the examples that you see on the left side of the slide, although I'm sure we all have experience to share in that regard. Actually, the examples provided here, such as the looting of Cholistan mounds, are all news in the press from the last 2 months, even the last month. And I'm also wondering if the current pandemic and lockdown might have triggered the need for an additional income coming from illicit land activities and archaeological looting. So in many ways, the degree to which we can protect our heritage highly depends on our capacity to identify and monitor patterns of abrupt and rapid land use change in the short terms. And I'm talking here, for example, on a weekly or daily basis. However, in many areas, it is almost impossible to provide regular on-site validations or ground-truth field survey. And this is particularly true for unprotected, isolated, or sites that are not catalogued. Moreover, and this has been also referred in this webinar, many of our excavations and field visits have been stopped by the current pandemic. So with this context, it is even more crucial than ever to monitor the Indus archaeological landscape with multi-temporal collections of satellite imagery that provide new data almost on a daily basis. And this allows us to quickly and effectively evaluate landscape change. And as shown by Dr. Cameron Petrie in his talk, we can always complement these short-term observations with more long-term landscape analysis. For example, with the integration of historical data sets, such as the topographical maps that Cameron was showing. And I also think that my colleague Arnau Garcia will focus later today on many of these aspects. So the study of endangered sites has, of course, close links to the sustainable exploitation of traditional resources and the creation of new research workflows that integrate our knowledge in one side on long-term subsistence strategies and land use patterns, and in the other side, our remote observations centered on site detection, as Dr. Petrie was showing, and landscape change. In that perspective, we aim to offer here a general and holistic picture of what we know today about the rural Indus settlements in Northern Gujarat and what they tell us about distinct stories of archaeological and historical land use up to the present day. And well, this might be redundant by most of you because I guess a third of the audience has been working or worked in Gujarat. But one of the landscape features that make North Gujarat a unique geographical setting is the dune interdune system that originated after the retreat of the Thar Desert to its actual boundaries during the Pleistocene and early Holocene. The slightly elevated sand dunes and the interdunal depressions played a major role in the prehistoric hunting and gathering communities that inhabited northern Gujarat during the early and mid-Holocene. And archaeological evidence that have been studied by Dr. Garcia Granero comes from the hunter-gatherer occupations at Loteshwar and Bahar Botimbo, which is a prominent dune located in the vicinity of an interdunal depression that could have been a paleo lake surrounded by other seasonal settlements. And the seed assemblage from Bahar Botimbo suggests that small millets, other grasses, and wild sesame were part of the hunter-gatherer's diet. Moreover, phytolith and starch data from this site further indicate the exploitation of palms, seeds, and tubers. So at Loteshwar, in contrast, seeds were not found in the hunter-gatherer deposits, but microbotanical data from grinding stones indicate the exploitation of the small millets and white pulses. Overall, the archaeological evidence from these two sites suggests the exploitation of a wide range of plants originating precisely from the semi-permanent water bodies that created marshy microenvironments in the dune-interdune system. So this data, together with the identification of blackbuck and other wild animals by Dr. Patel at Loteshwar, suggests that hunter-gatherers inhabiting northern Gujarat during the early mid-Holocene were relying on a broad spectrum economy that exploited a diverse set of microenvironments. So moving forward, the role of interdunal areas in northern Gujarat continued to be critical during the onset of semi-nomadic pastoralism during the mid-Holocene. Archaeobotanical evidence from early agropastoral occupations in the Anartha deposits at Loteshwar and also the pre-Pragbaz occupation at the Tranaford suggests that livestock herding was complemented with the cultivation of local small millets and probably also other summer crops such as horse gram and sesame. Notably, the presence of wheat associated with cultivation supports the hypothesis that these crops were not just simply gathered. Also, mid-Holocene agropastoral groups will have scheduled plant-related activities according to a highly seasonal monsoon regime, maximizing mobility during periods of low resource availability. For example, during the pre-monsoon period, the plants that were collected from the marshy interdunal depressions will have been an important food resource to palliate grain scarcity, including wild grasses, sedge, and tubers. These semi-nomadic groups in northern Gujarat could have also acquired food resources from neighboring Harappan communities, attested by the minor presence of winter crops such as wheat and barley at both Loteshwar and at Tranaford. With the advent of urban settlements in the mature period, Harappan communities had to develop a more intense land use strategy that involved a diversification in the exploitation of domestic animals, which includes cattle, goats, sheep, and also possibly pig, and an intensification of certain plant resources. Moreover, the enhanced trade with Harappan centers in the Indus Valley probably provide access to food as well as other resources, and as we see also in other areas. So during this period, the relative diversification on animal exploitation strategies contrasts with the specialization of agricultural practices. At Shikarpur, for example, we found evidence for cultivation of summer crops, mostly small millets and pulses. And this cereal legume intercropping pattern is repeated through the mature and late Harappan archaeobotanical record in Gujarat, suggesting that it was the strategy put in place by Harappan populations to maximize productivity by also improving the soil through nitrogen enrichment. Importantly, the overall minor presence of winter cereals might also represent some local small-scale cultivation, or perhaps given the lack of evidence for major irrigation during this period, the possible trading between Harappan settlements set in different ecological regions. Regarding the post-urban phase, during the early second millennium BC, it witnessed a major role in nomadic pastoralism and the arrival of African crops to Gujarat, including pear millet and sorghum. African millets are nutritionally comparable to South Asian small millets, but significantly more productive. And for this reason, pearl millet and sorghum were soon incorporated into the diet of local populations, while the importance of local small millets steadily decreased. And this shift, however, did not affect the ecological system, since both African and South Asian millets are summer crops with similar ecological requirements. Moreover, that's interesting, the settlement pattern in North Gujarat for the transition between the urban and the post-urban phase is similar to what has been documented for other Indus areas such as Haryana, in which the loss of connectivity with the previous urban wall will lead to the reorganization of particular areas, establishing new small-scale rural settlements in more broadly distributed areas, and reoccupying previously abandoned mounds or sand dunes. And it has been also stated by Dr. Adam Grimm in the Haryana Plains. Now, as we get close to the present, the early historical and medieval period witnessed the arrival of new irrigation mechanisms, such as the water wheel, the regatta, and the steep well, the BAPI, which facilitated a major crop diversification towards what we see today with the inclusion of cotton, oilseeds, indigo, and sugarcane, and all of them have a good representation in Northern Gujarat nowadays. In any case, historical source indicates that pearl millet and sorghum were the major crops in North Gujarat, whereas wheat was only cultivated in the black cotton soils that are characteristic of South Gujarat. In North Gujarat, we also document the transformation of natural interdune depressions into well-maintained water tanks and wells, such as the example in the slide, which is the tank in Loteshwar temple, which is just close to a natural water pond. With this long-term overview, we have briefly seen how different land use strategies were put in place through millennia, and that includes mobility, diversification, intensification, and technological innovation. At the local level, the water tanks or village ponds were the essential water storage resource until the spread of groundwater wells, which marks really a turning point in this land use story. In recent periods, groundwater exploitation rapidly spread to the Gujarat northern plains, and this phenomena culminated in the massive introduction of electric pumps during the development of the well-known Green Revolution, which most of you are well aware. And later on, with the increase of irrigated lands through the construction of large canals and interbasin water projects such as Narmada Canal, which is like 500 kilometers long. The combined use of groundwater and canal irrigation has progressively transformed the traditional local economy, and the region has slowly moved towards a cash crop economy. And we have this slide here in which, yet, despite an undeniable increase in crop production, the abandonment of traditional practice, coupled with an unparalleled demographic expansion, of course, has led to an imbalance of the socio-ecological system where cash crops have priority over more sustainable and resilient food crops. And in the graphs here, if we take a look to the total land under cultivation for Gujarat for the past 50 years, we observe a clear decrease of traditional crops such as millets in favor of wheat, whereas the overall pattern for cereal cultivation in the right shows that cereals have also decreased in favor of water-demanding cash crops such as cotton mostly. Now, although North Gujarat has one of the richest alluvial aquifers of northwestern India, especially north of the Patan area, decades of subsidized electricity and overpumping has caused acute environmental degradation, such as water table depletion and soil salinizations, and these are now big concerns for Gujarat especially. What's interesting here is that canals were supposed to solve these problems by increasing water availability. However, a canal intervention also has its own downside effects. For example, water is more expensive than ever, and it has led to some water-related problems on the availability and prices. And at the very end, it promotes intense agricultural in both interdunal areas, but as well as along well-preserved sand dunes, while also increasing salinization in some areas close to the canal sub-branch. Now, while groundwater exploitation started in the 1960s with the Green Revolution, by the early 2000s, almost 20 years ago, several districts in North Gujarat were withdrawing more groundwater every year than the actual limits of annual recharge, and that resulted in an acute aquifer depletion crisis. To mitigate water scarcity and overpumping, between 2008 and 2010 especially, many sub-branches of the Narmada Canal crossed the Gujarat plains, especially the area that doesn't have such rich aquifers like the Dune interdune area located close to the Little Run. Now, how can we evaluate all these long-term patterns, at least remotely. So what we have here is just an example of the change occurred in the last 50 years. And here there is a satellite image from the early 70s showing the post-monsoonal crops that are highlighted here in red color, primarily located towards the northern area, which has richer aquifers, whereas cultivation in the dune interdune area close to the Little Run shows well-preserved sand dunes and crops in the largest interdunal areas. Now, this image really contrasts with that one, and I will do that again just to, hey, let's say, look at that really change. And as this is a recent satellite imagery from the same area. Now, in here, we can notice the construction of the Narmada Canal towards the central part of the image, and the subsequent expansion of canal irrigation lands towards the dune, interdune area. Now, this of course has many implications. It's been changing also the cemetery deposition in the area. And also, importantly, we've been documenting many cases of canal encroaching with no archaeological sites. And as long as there is little communication with archaeologists and environmental stakeholders, many more sites might be lost with the connection of new sub-branch and the expansion of more large-scale irrigation schemes. In the right of the image, there's an example, there's a digital illusion model of the area of the Trana 4. This site was excavated in the early 90s and then again by the NOCAP team in 2010. And it's now completely destroyed by canal encroaching. And you have here a recent image of the same area. And I remember Dr. Rajesh went to the field and there was almost no material surface that could be found at the site. And most of the potential stratigraphy has been also lost. So these are just examples to show you the importance of at least monitoring all these patterns. But perhaps the main threat in Gujarat and elsewhere is the erosion and flattening of many archaeological mounds, as well as sand dunes in Gujarat, due to the expansion and encroachment of irrigated and mechanized agriculture. So in these examples, just to see some of these land change, you have an historical image, an historical satellite photograph from the early 70s in the left, showing well-preserved sand dunes in North Gujarat. And that is compared with the present day image of the same area, which shows intense cultivation, even also at the top of the dune. Now, regarding agricultural encroaching, I go back to the Cholistan Desert and to all the archaeological mounds, many of them related to the Indus civilization that Dr. Petri was talking about. In the Cholistan, many archaeological mounds are located at the fringe of the sand dunes where they meet with the traditional irrigated lands of the Indus River. And at least until recently, let's say that they were in a fair condition. Well, they could be covered by sand dunes, but most of the surface was already intact in a way. But especially after heavy rains in February of last year, we've been documenting that irrigated agriculture has been expanding gradually over the last months. And large areas of desert lands have been transformed into new irrigation fields. So this is happening at large scales now, and we were wondering, okay, how many sites can potentially be endangered by agricultural encroaching? And as you see in the image, many of the mounds were located in silty desert places, and those areas have been now transformed into irrigation lands. And many of the mounds are just touching or encroaching the agricultural lands. So to work on this in here, together with Drs. Petri, Orengo, and Garcia, we've been designing a multi-temporal workflow and algorithm that is based on annual, seasonal, and monthly vegetation change. So the idea is that for each known archaeological feature, we can systematically monitor agricultural advance and encroachment within a specific buffer safety area, which the user can adjust to either just the site or 50 meters from the site, 100 meters from the site. And therefore, we can foresee future directions of irrigation expansion and potential damage to site, especially in order to evaluate task priority for future surveys. What you see in the image in the left is in green, many of the traditional cultivated areas that have been put in place near the Cholistan Desert. But as we go towards the red color, we see the expansion of irrigated lands toward what was before desert areas. And of course, many of them just directly encroach many archaeological mounds. And what we have today is an updated database of all these archaeological mounds that comes from Mughal surveys that we were also detecting using the remote sensing approach with Dr. Orengo and Cameron Petrie. And what we can assess is the impact of this land use change that is affecting the preservation of many mounds. So for example, we have cases of low impact, and that will be where the mound is still well preserved and the agricultural expansion still or yet doesn't encroach with the site. But we have also many examples of total impact sites in which just recently, and especially between 2019, 2020, the expansion of agriculture has reached all the, or almost all the area of the site. So the idea is that we're just studying this algorithm, and hopefully it will be out soon, but the idea is that we can get an automatic databases of endangered heritage, and we can also explore and apply this method to other Indus areas. Now, just as we approach the end, as a final sum up, we have intended here to summarize what we can learn from the long-term perspective when we integrate different archaeological and landscape approach. In North Gujarat, monsoon-adapted summer crops, such as millets and tropical pulses, have been stable for the last 5,000 years, and we can add that, especially considering the environmental cost of modern agriculture, reinstating millet agriculture and traditional water storage mechanisms seems the best alternative for palliating ecological degradation. And this is in line with similar agronomic frameworks in other semi-arid regions worldwide. Also at present, as stated by Dr. Petrie, we also have a set of available geospatial data and remote workflows to accurately monitor landscape change and potential threats to the preservation of archaeological sites. And I think that we will see many more applications in this regard from this and other Indus contexts in the near future. In addition, there is also a rich, ongoing, and interdisciplinary debate to consolidate agricultural interventions that are well aligned towards a more balanced water management and land use strategy. For example, the rehabilitation and renovation of ancient water tanks is now a pivotal agenda for collective land interventions in Gujarat and other regions. And we have seen a gradual increase of water-saving technologies at the local level that benefit multiple smallholders, such as drip irrigation systems. Other initiatives, such as the one led by ICRISAT, for example, promote the cultivation of dryland cereals, such as millets, which are more tolerant to semi-arid climates and easier to produce under restricted water availability conditions. And just last but not least, if I have 1 or 2 more minutes, we aim to expand our current investigations into the neighboring Kutch region, thanks to a generous grant funded by the Spanish Polar Foundation. Together with Drs. Rogers and Avayan and the Department of Archaeology, University of Kerala, we will expand the previous excavations at Junakatilla, while also conducting new regional surveys to document the intensity of early Harappan occupations in Kutch. That will be our main interest, but also investigating the cultural landscape of Kutch and the Bani grasslands. We actually should be on the field right now with our colleagues in Kerala. And we just hope that in the next Indus conference or webinar, we will be back with new data from Kutch. And that will be all from our side. I would like to finish with a special thanks to the organizers and our colleagues from the Department of Archaeology, University of Kerala, and also to Professors Madela and Ajit Prasad for our time together within the NOGAP project. Now, before going into the Q&A, I guess that Dr. Juan Garcia Granero has also some final remarks. So I will pass on to him. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Francesc. You put everything beautifully together. I simply wanted to stress that this talk, in a way, seemed like two different topics, sustainability or archaeology of sustainability and endangered archaeology. But we believe that these two topics are cannot be separated. These issues cannot be addressed independently. They are interrelated. And if we manage to give our input to the archaeology of sustainability and develop more sustainable land use strategies, we will at the same time be able to protect our archaeological heritage. So that's why we chose to give this talk with these two topics together.